Hello and welcome. My name is Aaron Stein, Director of the Middle East Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, and you are listening to the Middle East Brief, a podcast focused on developments in the Middle East and why they matter for U.S. foreign policy. Be sure to subscribe to the Middle East Brief on iTunes and Spotify, and sign up to receive FPRI's Weekly Insights newsletter, where a link to the show will be delivered every 2 weeks straight to your inbox at www.fpri.org. Hello and welcome. Today I'm talking to Becca Wasser, a senior policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and a Middle East Brief podcast veteran. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I assume you're also at home as we all deal with our current uncertain circumstances. So thanks for calling in and taking time from your busy schedule.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, please wash your hands, stay inside, let's flatten the curve.
That's right. All the country is asking for us is to stay indoors. Let's stay indoors. You can drink at home. And just a side note to listeners, because I am at home, I have 2 children. So if you hear screaming in the background, trust me, my wife is watching them. Don't worry about it. Okay. And so with that, I think the point of this podcast at these uncertain times is to create non-corona content. So we're not going to be talking about the coronavirus. We're going to be talking about the Patriot missile, and stuff that you and I often talk about in private, which is the overuse of this system. And it's come up in the news recently in that during it seems like forever ago, tensions between Russia and Turkey devolving into armed conflict, Ankara asked the United States to deploy a Patriot missile system inside its territory, and also reports that it's being deployed in Iraq. You know, I talk a lot with people who don't really follow the Patriot all that closely, which is probably 99.9 repeater of the population. You know, it's kind of hard for people to understand why it's just not so easy to send one all over the place whenever people ask for one. So you are an expert on this. So let's just talk about that first. You know, like what would be the challenges of sending Patriot, to respond to a Turkish request for Idlib or in Syria with just a Patriot deployment?
Sure. So first things first, there's only a finite number of Patriot batteries that the U.S. military has. And these batteries are operated by a number of incredibly well-trained individuals, largely within the U.S. Army. So for the most part, we're talking about low-density, high-demand assets. And to a certain extent, there are some Patriots that are already spoken for in different geographic areas. So when you have that, then you have additional requests that come in, predominantly from the U.S. military itself. Those are requests that need to be serviced, or at least for the U.S. military to see if they can make them work. And then on top of that, when you've got requests from allies and partners around the world, it makes it really hard for the U.S. military to better spread some of its Patriot batteries across the world, as well as some of the radar systems that are needed. So you have that. Then you've got the fact that, for the most part, when different countries are asking for Patriot batteries, they're not just asking for the batteries themselves. They're asking for personnel to come and actually operate them. And so when you're talking then about trying to deploy Patriot battalions, it gets really complicated. It's not only having to move the equipment and move the personnel, but also to make sure that they too aren't getting overtaxed. All assets and all accompanying personnel. I mean, there is bog to dwell time, which is sort of the amount of time that you're deployed to the amount of time that you are either resting and sort of recuperating for the next deployment, as well as training so that you're ready for the current fight, as well as potentially future fights. So when you put all of that together, you've got a pretty difficult situation, and you can see just how easily these assets and the personnel that operate them are getting overstretched.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sort of gets lost, I mean, in the discussion about the Turkish request, so the Turkish request comes amid a time of considerable heightened tension, where Ankara was using military force to target Syrian regime both air defense, armor, personnel, and using its air force to shoot down Syrian jets, is that the Patriot was sort of this idea that it could be deployed indefinitely as a tool for a no-fly zone. And I'll get back to that in a second. But also that other partners within NATO had already deployed Patriot in Turkey, them being the Spanish, who were operating a battery. It's something I want to drill down a little bit because you and I have talked about this a little bit, is just like that bog to dwell ratio, and why that's important. Again, just in conversations, people don't understand, like, and I don't mean that to sound in a condescending or sort of pejorative way. It's just it's kind of complicated to think about, but simplistic once it's explained, and it's just, you have to really just think about it a little bit. Is why these mostly dudes can't just be up and moved at a moment's notice, and how they are used, and how the Patriots are sort of dispersed all around the world.
Okay, so in the most simplistic way, requirements for the U.S. Patriot units, largely Patriot battalions, they have to achieve what's referred to as a 1-to-2 ratio for boots on the ground to dwell ratio. So that's often what we refer to as bog to dwell. So that means that they have to spend about twice the length of their deployment rebuilding readiness. And readiness has been a huge focus for the U.S. Army in recent years because in previous years, there's been so much wear and tear on equipment, on forces, with constant deployments, that the U.S. military felt as though it was not well prepared to fight future fights. So this emphasis on readiness has essentially created restrictions on how long units can be deployed for, but also creates requirements for them to have to continue to train so that they are current on different proficiencies. And this, in current thinking, is what prepares them for future conflicts, which, according to the National Defense Strategy, are likely going to be against other great powers such as Russia and China. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts basics of how bog to dwell works.
Right. Okay. And so then, maybe then just extrapolating out of that, one of the things that people want to use Patriot for, it's been around since 2012, is this idea that you can use it for a no-fly zone. And Patriot is, for point defense. I mean, it was originally conceived of as an air defense weapon, but because of advancements in computers and radars, it was able to, or microprocessors, I should say, and radars, it was calibrated and then upgraded to have capabilities against a certain class of ballistic missile. I'm not sure, at least from a technical perspective, it could be used in a way to provide blanket coverage over a large area, at least if it was to defend against ballistic missiles. But beyond that, beyond the technicalities, and somebody could probably correct me on that, is just the how it would work to be able to rotate batteries throughout, say, a place like Turkey, to keep a no-fly zone in place for a long period of time. It's not just as simple as saying we want to keep. It's not that simple. I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the first thing is that in order to do a no-fly zone, you're entirely right that Patriots are probably not the systems that you need, or they're not the sole system that you need. So no-fly zones are usually quite complex, and it's fairly difficult to keep them in place. So the fact that Turkey asked for, I believe, 2 Patriot batteries within its to be deployed within its territory, I don't even think that alone would be enough. So you've got that, and then having to do these constant rotations. And even if, for example, other NATO members were able to backfill, it would still put a lot of wear and tear. So ultimately, I think it probably isn't the best move, nor is it really something that can credibly be achieved with the capabilities at hand.
And so if we're switching gears now, one of the things, again, it's the news cycle in 2020 has been, let's say, hypersonic in its speed. I mean, let's just go back, okay? And like at the turn of the new year, we had the killing or assassination, I don't care what word we use, of Qasem Soleimani, in Iraq, and you had the Iranian retaliatory strike with very accurate ballistic missiles, as it turns out. The Iranians have made considerable advancements in their ballistic missiles, and they showed them off. God, that seems like forever ago. But, and so now you are seeing in the news recently, I believe it was reported a couple of days ago, is that the United States is both consolidating its people in Iraq, so far-flung forward operating bases are being consolidated into sort of mega FOBs, mega forward operating bases, and that air defense is being deployed, presumably Patriot. That's also not that easy either. I mean, so like if you're weighing both of these things at the same time, so if you have the demand of Patriot in Iraq and then you have the request from Turkey, it seems like a no-brainer to me. But I mean, maybe you can expound upon that a little bit about sort of how that works and about where the other demands of Patriot have been in the Middle East on top of the Iraqi issue.
Yeah, so just to sort of give some quick background and some quick history. So after the January 8th ballistic missile attack on U.S. forces at Al-Assad Air Base, it was identified that there were no air defense systems that were up and operating. And because of this gap, there was a lot of outcry, which is why U.S. military officials said that they were going to move in air defense systems and specifically noted the Patriots. However, that also came around the same time as a lot of tensions with the government of Iraq over military access related to the U.S. assassination of Qasem Soleimani. So even though the U.S. military has been promising to move in Patriots since early January, they haven't been able to do so. And most recently, Frank McKenzie, who is the head of CENTCOM, noted that they are actually working to finally move them in as part of this base consolidation that you noted, Aaron. So putting all of this together, it seems as though there's finally movement on something that has been long promised, and in some ways, at least in the way that this very fast-paced news cycle has been working, long planned since January actually means that you can plan in advance. But the issue on top of all of that is the fact that the U.S. Patriots were already overstretched in CENTCOM. You have them at some of the major U.S. bases, and those are kind of always assumed to be there. And then you've also had an uptick in U.S. Patriots in Saudi Arabia. And this has been related to not only the attacks that occurred late last year, on Abqaiq and Khurais in Saudi Arabia, as well as the reopening of Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. So in some ways, there's been Patriots that have been put there in order to protect U.S. forces that are back in Saudi Arabia for the first time since 2003. So you have this already overstretched mix of assets in CENTCOM, adding in the new Patriots that have to go into Iraq for force protection measures. And then potentially on top of that, the Turkish request, even though technically Turkey is its own thing. It's sort of this big mix of just assets upon assets in places that, sometimes the US hasn't traditionally had a Patriot or an air defense asset. You also have to remember that there are Patriots located around the globe, particularly in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. So there's an open question of where some of these Patriots coming from. Are they coming from training areas that happen to be located probably in the United States, and they're pulling them from training for actual operational use? Or are they being pulled from EUCOM and INDOPACOM, which have been noted in the NDS as being two of the top priority theaters given the prioritization of threats that the document has put out. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and again, this is just pulled from we have a weird, unhealthy obsession with Patriot deployment. So when we see something pop up, I usually send it to you over direct message over WhatsApp, just for the background of listeners. But one of the things that came up with the Turkish request is, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this will be the final question, is that there was talk about pulling them from Germany. And if I'm remembering correctly, you told me that that would be a bad idea, or at least a bad precedent. If I'm remembering correctly, please expound. If I'm not, we'll cut this from the podcast.
So it sets a bad precedent in the sense that it actually undermines national defense strategy priorities. And so there's been this weird tension with how the Middle East and the CENTCOM area of responsibility is going to be handled based on the NDS. Is it a theater of secondary importance? Is it going to be sort of reframed in a way that perhaps maybe CENTCOM is only relevant to where the United States is actively competing or deterring Russia and China? And then with some of the more recent events with Iran, a lot of that got turned on. So even with that, there still isn't really this good understanding of how the Middle East really fits into some of the NDS priorities and fulfilling the top obligations that it puts forward. So it would end up setting a bad precedent in that it would actively undermine some of the NDS priorities. And if the Department of Defense is truly serious about implementing the NDS the way that they say that they are, it's something that they ought to think twice about doing. Additionally, I think there's a broader question at play about whether the US should fulfill the Turkish request. And this comes down to some of the politics between the two countries, because if, as you know really well, because you're the Turkish expert on this podcast, but Turkey turned down U.S. offer to purchase Patriot missile systems, instead deciding to purchase the Russian S-400 system, which ultimately led to Turkey being dropped out of the US F-35 program, as well as creating some tensions within the NATO construct as well. So there's sort of an open question as to whether it's a good precedent for political optics, but also for some of the longer-term defense planning that the US has said that it is going to do.
It's not so easy. I mean, it's just, one of the reasons I want to have you on the show is because it seems simple in that a country, and we're talking about Turkey here, makes a request, and therefore it's this idea that there's always slack to spare, and that this is a no-brainer, especially with the amount of bombing that was going on and the amount of humanitarian consequences that come from this. And, it's just never that simple. It's one of the reasons I really want to talk about this. And the other thing is that, we have to, obviously, before alliance management, you have to prioritize your own people. And if we're going to continue with this maximum pressure strategy, and it, by all accounts, the United States and the Trump administration is committed to this, continuing sanctions, even at the height of, let's say, our pandemic problem, and Iranian ballistic missile capabilities, and you're going to keep forces in Iraq for the foreseeable future, or the drawdown is going to be more gradual than all at once pull out. You have to protect our people, and so Patriot is a low density, high in demand asset, to steal your language. But I mean, I just think it's important to really work through those problems, because it's not as simple as saying we need to do this and we can do it tomorrow, because it's just not that easy. Any last words before we sign off here? I mean, before we go back,
I couldn't have said it better myself. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I will just repeat. We are podcasting from home. At least at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. I believe RAND is the same. I believe you're working at home.
Yeah.
Stay home, people. Do your part for the country and for people around the world. Wash your hands, cough into your elbow or into a tissue, and be nice to people who are in need. We are all in this together. So, Becca, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.